Okay, so we've been talking about this kinsman redeemer thing for a few days now, but you might be asking specifically, what exactly is the responsibility of a kinsman redeemer? Well, Professor Donald Glenn at DTS long ago said that the term actually kind of means more like protector of family rights. And they have responsibilities that include these things. Responsibility number one, to buy back property that members of the family had sold. Now, whatever the reason the family had sold was irrelevant. Their responsibility was to buy it back and protect that. And at some point, they might even have to give it back to it. Okay? Number two, they were to provide an heir for a deceased brother by marrying her and producing a child with her. Okay, that's what we've been talking about when it comes to Ruth and Naomi and all that stuff a minute ago. Here's another one, though. To buy back a family member who had been sold into slavery due to poverty. That's a pretty big responsibility. And here's the other responsibility: to avenge a relative who had been murdered by the killing murderer. Wow, so the kinsman redeemer has a lot of responsibilities, but it's the first two that are the most important. Number one, to buy back property, and number two, to provide an heir for a deceased brother or family member. And so when we're looking at what we're having a conversation about today in Ruth chapter 4, I want you to keep those two things in mind, because these are yet again evidences of God's grace when it comes to this story in particular. So, while Ruth is talking to Naomi and filling her in. So, remember what Naomi's last words were in chapter 3? He will not rest until it gets solved today. Start chapter 4. The very first word, meanwhile. Meaning that not only did Boaz go do it the day of, he went immediately, because this is early in the morning and Ruth's gone back to Naomi, and while she's telling the story, Boaz is already taking care of this. Wow. That's talk about taking the bull by the horns. So meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down. This is where business was done. This is where the leaders would sit, is at the town gate. And sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. And Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Okay, now, fun little story about this. This guy in the story doesn't have a name. Okay? In the book of Ruth, his name is so-and-so. Like, that's what the Hebrew word that is written for this guy is. He's so-and-so. So he is an unimportant person. What an interesting little note. So there's your nerd note for the day. So they come and they sat down, and Boaz takes 10 elders of the town and says, "Sit here," and they did so. So everybody knows, hey, we're about to have a conversation and we need witnesses. So he said to so-and-so, "Naomi, who's come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest you buy it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and then I'm next in line." Okay, now, remember, yesterday I asked the question, can you be shrewd as a follower of Christ? So the story that Boaz just said, is there anything wrong with the story? No, what he's telling is true. Well, we know Boaz is a man of integrity. He's telling her this. But Boaz is also a pretty smart businessman. He knows that he's going to get this guy, "Hey, I got a land. You interested in this land?" So this guy's going to say, and he says it in the end of verse 4, "I will redeem it." But then Boaz says, "Oh, by the way, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." I mean, talk about smart sales tactic here. He butters it up, but then he drops the "but," and he throws it in there, and he says, "But," and this guy suddenly goes, "Hold on a minute, I can't. Whoa, wait, hold on. That's not the deal I signed up for." So and so says, "I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it, I can't do it." That's pretty shrewd. That's pretty wise on Boaz's part. See, Boaz wanted to marry Ruth. Boaz, I think, really admired Ruth, as we've seen in the statements that he's made. Boaz would love to marry Ruth. I think he actually does truly love her. And this is beautiful. This is one of the most beautiful love stories in all of Scripture. Don't take this for granted, because this is incredible grace. This is someone taking someone who was lost and saving them. And we'll talk more about that next week as we wrap up the book. But Boaz uses incredible shrewdness here. And so the guardian so-and-so Redeemer says, you do it. And so, now in earlier times, this is where that explanation in verse 7 I told you a minute ago, that some of the things we don't fully understand, and even they didn't because the book was so old. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off a sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. All right, what a beautiful story of I'm excited. We know what's going to happen. I mean, there's no spoiler here, but it's so cool to see Boaz and his character and integrity and responsibility and his shrewdness, which we're supposed to have also as Christians. We're supposed to be very shrewd and wise and sneaky, not now this is important, not lacking integrity, not lying, but we are also allowed to be very wise and sly in our dealings. And the Scripture's full of examples of people that have done this. All right, so tomorrow we're going to wrap this chapter up. Next week we're going to wrap this chapter up, and we will also wrap up the book of Ruth. So see you then.